Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, and if people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they are just very experimental and solid all round. So the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases through Systembolaget. It's a style that I very much enjoy, but one that you don't see all that many of these days, and it's always nice to try this brewery's new releases actually. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing the Gothenburg beers, just because it's channel tradition and all that jazz these days. But for this review then, we are going to return to the wonderful Beerbliotek. So this particular beer is called We're Taking Over the World One Kiss at a Time. It's number 344 in the Beerbliotek recipe inventory. This one comes in at 6.8% ABV, and it's a West Coast IPA. So yeah, this one was released as part of the Lokalt was Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for February of 2023. And yeah, I have heard that this is quite a nice West Coast IPA. As you know, if you've watched the channel for any length of time, I do miss my West Coast IPAs. So whenever the chance to review one of these comes up, I'm always on that quite quickly. But yeah, it's been a wee while since we had a West Coast IPA from Beerbliotek, a good 6 months at least if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, this should hopefully be quite nice. But let's crack on then and see what this beer has in store for us. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Beerbliotek before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So just go up and go into the homepage, use the search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like, and if I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many others, and there are playlists for a lot of different countries in there as well that you can check out. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then and chat a little bit about Beerbliotek once again. So, Beerbliotek, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded back in 2013 by a multinational group of friends. So this is Adam Norman, who is from Australia, Richard Bull, who's from New Zealand, a Kiwi, Anders Hedlund, who is a Swede, and then Darl Denecker, who comes from South Africa. So Adam and Richard ran Bar Doppio in Gothenburg, and they'd been homebrewing together from about 2011. But Darl and Anders were regular customers at the bar, and the four of them often just used to sit and chat about beer together. But Darl joined in with the home brewing, and then in 2012, Anders joined in, and they decided at this stage they were going to take their brewing project commercial. So the original brewery that they started out in was in the old Klippan Sugar building, a really nice old building very close to the old Carnegie Brewery, quite a famous company. And the original brew kit they had was from Brewfab in Scotland. I believe they brought that from Brewdog. But in the first year, they brewed 38 different varieties of beer, and this is where the whole idea of Beerbliotek kind of began. But all of the beers are brewed in very small, or all of the beers were originally brewed in quite small batches. They've expanded quite a lot these days, of course. But the idea behind this is that they want to stick to their home brewing roots of rarely brewing the same beer. So they don't have a fixed range, and they're always bringing out brand new beers, but there are a number of regulars. You know, a passion for gingers, an instant of clarity. You know, these are, and the Eternal Dankness, Eternal Darkness, these are beers that appear fairly regularly actually. But in 2015 they opened a second brewery in Kungston, which is where they now have their main tap room and run their main brewing operations, and they brewed sour beers for a period of time in the old brewery, and they also began, when they moved, they began working on a barrel aging project in their new facility as well. But over the years they've continued to develop different recipes and expanded the company, and in 2018 Fabian and Victor Helte joined joined the company as investors, and then in 2022 they were joined by Paula Stenberg, who runs the Nudie Jeans brand, which is one that I do need to look into. I need to get some new jeans actually. But the current brewmaster at the brewery is the Italian Riccardo Boff, who studied brewing and distilling at Heriot Watt in Edinburgh, quite a famous brewing programme. But he worked for Pilot in Scotland, Kramer Lee in South Korea, and then he came to Gothenburg. But he joined Beerbliotek in late 2020, and then in early 2021, Beerbliotek purchased a 750 litre distillery, and they started a spirits company called Wet City, and they released their first gins in August of that year. But the idea behind the name Beerbliotek is quite straightforward. They want to brew a wide variety of beers so that their customers can always learn something new about a different type of yeast, a different hop, or even a different style. But they say it's the same concept of a library, but just with beer, hence the name Beerbliotek. It takes its name from the Latin word, or I guess even the Swedish word as well, for library, biblioteca. But yeah, as of February 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have released 335 different kinds of beer, and as I said, there are a wide variety of different styles from Beerbliotek available. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Beerbliotek for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's everything for the brewery history section. So let's go on and actually have a little look at the beer itself. So like I mentioned to you earlier, this one comes in at 6.8% ABV. It's a West Coast IPA. It's another one of these very long Beerbliotek names, so we might have to figure out how we actually name this beer on the channel, but we'll put the full name of the beer in the video description. Like I say, at number 334. This is a 500 milliliter can, incidentally, which Beerbliotek have been using a little bit more often recently. I think the first beer we had in the 500 was the lager that they released. But yeah, you can see silver top on the can there. I believe this beer cost me 55 Swedish kronor, which is about the same price as the Dugas ones that we've had this month in the 500 milliliters. But yeah, this one, 55 Swedish kronor is about €5.50, £5 sterling, somewhere in the region of $6 American, just going by the exchange rates and stuff like that. But yeah, like we said, 6.8% West Coast IPA. This should be quite nice. One of the little touches I always like on the Beerbliotek cans is this thing where it says Swedish craft beer, and you can also see the Beerbliotek established 2013 symbol up here. But yeah, it looks very nice, I have to say. So yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very, very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. So let's do this. So that looks pretty nice, I have to say. So as you can see, this beer's poured pretty much as you would expect of a West Coast IPA, and I think this one is going to be right up my street just from the colour of it, but we'll come to that in a minute. So you can see this beer has a lovely kind of rich, almost blood orange amber colour to it. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer as well. But when it comes to most kinds of IPAs, you don't often have to care about that. You can see that when we poured the beer, it poured with a bit over a finger of a frothy, I would say slightly cream coloured head. I wouldn't describe this head as being perfect white, but yeah, I have to say it does look very nice. You can see there's a mixture of very small foamy bubbles in there and kind of medium-sized ones as well. But overall, the head does look very, very nice, I have to say. And that is, of course, going to fade away to be a thinner, foamy layer the further on we go. But yeah, this one, it certainly looks the part of a nice West Coast IPA. 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. And as you can see, this one has a little bit of that natural haze to it. So yeah, the way it goes together is pretty damn nice, actually. So yeah, I think that's good. But yeah, I don't think we need to say anything else about the appearance of this one, but you can tell from the colour of this one, I think this is going to be one of the more kind of caramelly and oily leaning West Coast IPAs. For me, there's two ways a West Coast IPA can go. They can either be a little bit more oily and caramelly, such as the Sierra Nevada Torpedo, or they can be a little bit kind of more bready and biscuity, such as the Pliny the Elder from Russian River Brewing. So yeah, let's take a wee look at the aroma then and see if this one carries through with my theory. Yeah, I think it does. So straight away with this beer, you can smell it's got a lovely bit of that oily sweetness in the malt base. You've got a nice kind of quite bright green component to it, and you've also got that kind of more oily fruity character that you expect to this style. I have to say I'm very curious to see whether this is going to be one of the more modern takes on the West Coast IPAs, because one thing I have noticed about these styles over the years is that the bitterness has dropped. Back in the day, these beers were always, at least 80 IBUs, but these days they've kind of dropped down to, about 50 or so, because, a lot of people have got into craft beer on the New Englands, which are, of course, naturally lower in their IBU count, usually about 30. But yeah, this beer, I can smell quite a little bit of dankness to it, but it doesn't smell overly bitter from the aroma, so we'll need to see if that builds in the flavour actually. But let's break this aroma down and just describe it a wee bit more in depth for you. So, the backbone of this beer, absolutely, you get a little bit of that kind of fresh, brown bready bread crust coming out of the beer. So yeah, lovely kind of brown bready, fresh bread crust in there. There's a little touch of an almost slightly crackery note to this one. I do get little hints of woodiness as well, but then there's quite a bit of like fresh wholemeal brown bread. Yeah, so the way this beer goes together is really nice in that sense. Yeah, nice kind of fresh, crusty brown bread in there. Fluffy, there's a little bit of fluffier white bread as well. So it's bread crust, a little bit of cracker, a little bit of wood, brown wholemeal bread, white bread sitting above that, and then you've got, then above that, you can smell the kind of sweeter, kind of brown sugary notes out of this one. So there's a little bit of straight up caramel in here, and I do get a little bit of a slightly kind of drier, more toasty brown sugar as well, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I'm curious to see how sweet this is going to be in the actual flavour of the beer, because the more and more that I smell of this one, the sweeter, the sweeter it becomes. Yeah, aroma wise, this is, as I say, very, very nice. Yeah, I think, yeah, the malty side of this one is proper. It's proper old school as well. It reminds me of the old kind of, the school pin and yeah, just the Sierra Nevada Paleo and all these kind of things. It's properly old school. This, which is, I wonder if that's what they were going for. Maybe the name of this one is a reference to the original IPAs, which just kind of took over the world gradually. But yeah, this is nice. On the hoppy side of things, there's something very familiar about this one. I think this might be an old school like Citra Simcoe or Citra Simcoe Amarillo, something like that. The hoppy character in this beer just smells very old school. But definitely there's a little touch of earthiness coming out of this one. Yeah, a little touch of earthiness to it. It's got quite a bright floral character, but at the same time you are getting some of the dankness out of this beer that you would want. And then you've got a nice kind of brighter and slightly wet grassy character at the front of the nose too. So when it comes to the green component of IPAs, the thing to remember is that the thing to remember with these beers is that you always have with IPAs you have three different kinds of hoppings. So you've got early addition hopping, which gives you mainly bitterness. That takes place within the first hour of the wort boil. You've got late addition hopping, which takes place in the last half hour of the wort boil. That gives you a little bit of bitterness, but also a wee bit of flavour, or also quite a bit of flavour and aroma. Then you've also got dry hopping, which comes after the wort boil is complete, and that's all about the flavour and aroma. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together in that sense is is quite interesting because you have got a little bit of that deeper dank character to it, which indicates early edition hopping. Remember, West Coast IPAs back in the day always used all three. New England IPAs tend to use late edition and dry hopping, which is why their green components are brighter rather than being deeper and dank. But with this beer, you can smell on the floral side of things. You have got a little bit of a more spicy floral character to this one, but also a slightly deeper pine resin to it as well. But on the fruity side of things, I get, you know, I do get a little bit of a kind of grapefruity character out of this one. Definitely a bit of a more oily passion fruit and a wee touch of mango. I do think there's a bit of maybe Citra or Cascade or something like this. This could well also be an old school sea hop beer, you know, Citra, Cascade, Centennial, Columbus. It could be something like that. And, you know, Columbus would give you the spiciness that in the green component, and, you know, Chinook potentially would give you a bit of the grapefruit and a wee bit of the pine resin. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. So, yeah, on the fruity side of things, definitely a bit of grapefruit. You know, there are some lighter tropical fruits in there as well, some mango, some passion fruit, and you've also got that, you do also have a good little bit of, yeah, you do have a good little bit of kind of orangey character to this one as well. So that makes me think there might be more like a mosaic or an Amarillo in this one. I'm tempted more to say mosaic because it smells like a lighter orange, whereas Amarillo would give you a kind of more zesty, oily type character. But there's definitely a wee bit of orangey character coming out of this beer. I'm certain of that. But aroma-wise, this one is pretty damn nice, I have to say. I do like how this goes together. Properly old school West Coast IPA, this one. So as I always say, take a little bit of time to ponder over the aroma of these beers before you get stuck into them. You know, West Coast IPAs don't come around all that often these days, although I have noticed more and more breweries are doing them at least, you know, once or twice a year, which is nice to see. But as I always say, take a little bit of time to ponder over that aroma, because that's half the experience when it comes to craft beer. But we are going to get stuck into this one now and see what it's all about, a proper old school West Coast IPA. So this one is We're Taking Over the World One Kiss at a Time, number 344 in the Beerbliotek recipe inventory. Yeah, a West Coast IPA, 6% ABV. Let's do this. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Oh yeah, I have to say that is pretty nice. And I was right, it is one of these kind of more sweet and oily leaning West Coast IPAs. I've not had one like this in quite a wee while actually. But yeah, the way this goes together is pretty damn good. I'm going to say thumbs up to Beerbliotek. I'm waiting to see a little bit if the bitterness builds in this one, because I can feel it doing a little bit, but I'm not sure exactly how much it's going to do it. Because I found that with West Coast IPAs these days, when I try them, quite often they'll show their bitterness a little bit later on, further into the aftertaste, whereas back in the day, when I was drinking these, you would get it straight away. But you have to remember your palate is always changing and evolving, so probably these days I don't perceive bitterness in the same kind of punchy way as I did back in the day when I first started the channel. This is always what's going on. But I have to say, this is a very nice West Coast IPA, and it kind of gives you everything you want. You've got a little bit of sweetness in there, you've got a good green component, and you've also got the big oily fruity note to it as well. So yeah, the way it goes together is really nice. Yeah. So the way this beer goes together is good. Let's try and break this down though and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth, as we always like to do. So middle third of your palate then. The backbone of this beer, you can feel that nice kind of brown bready bread crust there. That just forms the backbone of the beer. On top of that, you have well, toward the front of that middle third of the palate, actually, you do get a little touch of woodiness in there. But like I say, you've got quite a grainy bread crust. You've got a little bit of woodiness toward the front of that middle third of your palate, and then above that there's a teeny little bit of an almost crackery note. But then the next layer up for me, because this is quite a layered beer in terms of its flavour, the next layer up actually has quite a wee bit of a kind of brown bready character. It's not quite rye bread, but it's also a little bit more grainy than a straight up wholemeal kind of brown bread. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together in that sense is really nice. Yeah, I do like how this goes together in the malt base. Actually, it really does sweeten up the further into it you go. So like I say, bread crust, that kind of slightly more grainy brown bread. Then you've got the kind of taller white bready character coming out of this beer too, which is very, very nice. Yeah, so the taller white bready character you have in there, it's kind of fluffy and you've got a little bit of sweetness to it as well. But above that white bready character, then you start to get some of the brown sugary notes out of the beer. So yeah, the brown sugary side of the beer in this one, in the dead centre of your palate, you've got a little circle there. So in the dead centre of your palate, you've got a little bit of you can feel that straight up kind of oily caramel coming out of the beer, and that of course is the alcohol that gives you a good bit of that sweetness. But as you move further out from that kind of more dense caramelly centre, you start to get a slightly brighter and sweeter caramel, and then there's almost a little bit of a toasty, there's almost like a layer underneath those that's a very slightly toasty caramel. And as you push out toward the extremities of that, middle third of your palate, you get a little bit more of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity type quality. So I have to say that is something I do really like about this one. The way the kind of brown sugary side of the beer goes together is very nice. But yeah, I do like this one. Like I say, it gets a thumbs up from me on the malty side. But I think that covers the middle third of the palate in this one. Let's go to the back third of the palate. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a kind of that bready build up in there, which I think is very, very nice. It's kind of a mix between white and brown bread. It has got that little bit of graininess to it, but the base of that back third of your palate, you still get the bread crust, but it's a little bit drier and a bit more grainy. As I've always said, more more bitter and dry, more kind of dry and bitter flavours come out a little bit further back on the palate. But yeah, and the sweeter flavours come out further forward. So yeah, you can feel that bread crusty character is even more kind of grainy. Then above that, you get a little bit of the Jacob's cream cracker. Above everything else, you've got a wee bit more of a kind of wholemeal. You've got the wholemeal brown bread again. You can feel that layer is a little bit more kind of light and airy in comparison to the middle third of your palate, and it's also taller too. Then you get the white bready layer above that, which is actually a little bit sweeter, I think, but again still lighter and more airy. And yeah, above everything else there, you get some of the yeasty characteristics out of the beer. So you've got a slightly more kind of farmhousey light white bread. It's got a wee bit of a crackery, woody sort of character to it. So that's quite interesting too. But yeah, the way the beer goes together on that back third of the palate is quite nice. But this is interesting. The further into the aftertaste I go with this beer, I do get a little bit more kind of graininess out of it. But yeah, you can feel the back third of your palate. You can feel the flavour is definitely taller. Then as you come into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So yeah, the malty and yeasty side of this beer is quite nice, but like I say, definitely one of the more kind of grainy West Coast IPAs that I've come across. Let's go on to the hoppy side of the beer and have a wee look at that then. So, on the grainy side of the beer, or on the green component side of the beer. That's what I was looking for. In the back corners of the palate, you do get a nice little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, there's a little touch of herbal character, and as you reach the front corners of the palate, you've definitely got a little bit more of a kind of bright floral aromatic green component there. You can feel along the sides of the palate, you start to get some of the piney resin out of this one, so I wonder if there's a bit of Chinook in here. But then as you reach the front corners of the palate, you've also got a little bit of a kind of spicy floral character. And for me, that's a bit more indicative of Columbus, actually. Columbus is one of these. Columbus is a very good bittering hop that way, gives you that big spicy floral character, whereas Chinook is all about the pine resin. But round the front curve of the palate, the beer is a little bit lighter and more grassy. It's also a little bit wetter too, which is kind of interesting. So nice green component to this beer, I have to say. But like I say, the bitterness, I don't find this beer anywhere near as bitter as I would have found these back in the day. So that's kind of interesting. But I think this is a slightly lower bitterness West Coast IPA. Is probably to encourage. This is the other thing from the brewery's perspective. They'll be trying to encourage people to try the West Coast IPA and get into it a little bit more. But yeah, in terms of the fruity side of things, then we'll go to the front third of the palate now. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get that nice little bit of bready build up in there, a little bit of a kind of sweeter brown bready character. But the base of that front third of your palate in this beer is, you've got a little bit of the bread crust, you've got the sweeter brown bread, and then above that you get the nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, on the fruity side of things, it is kind of as I picked up in the aroma. I do wonder if there's a little bit of cascade in this beer as well, just from some of the flavours I'm getting in the fruit. So at the let's just take that fruity character then. At the back of that front third of your palate, there's definitely a little bit of I would say a kind of stronger grapefruity note. Then as you move slightly further forward from that, there's a little bit of a stronger passion fruit, but it's also kind of layered. The base of that back part of the front third of your palate, it's got a wee bit more, it has got a little bit more of a it has got a wee bit of a more kind of sultana, white green grapey character to it. So that's quite interesting there. So a little bit of a stronger grapefruity note. So say a little bit of a sultana character kind of underneath. And then, yeah, you do get that little bit more. I think that the sort of sultana character is kind of what's making me think Cascade, to be honest with you, and that strong grapefruit. I think that's going to be a combination of Chinook and Cascade, and I think citrus probably also in here as well. But as you move further forward, like I say, you get a more oily passion fruity note, and as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, you've got more of a kind of juicy mango character coming out of the beer as well. So the way that everything pieces together in this beer is really quite interesting for me. I think it's a big thumbs up from me in that regard. So yeah, it's yeah, it does get a big thumbs up from me in that sense. But as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, it's all about the orange. I get quite a little bit of an orangey, a big oily orange character out of this one, but there is just something about the fruity side of this beer that's telling me it's very old school. So I do think Columbus and Chinook have been used in this one. I'm pretty certain about Cascade as well, potentially Citra, and I think maybe a little bit of Amarillo, something like that. There's the orangey character you get in the flavour is a lot more oily and zesty than I was picking up in the aroma, because I did suspect Mosaic, but there's something telling me that the fruity character in this one is more akin to the oily orangey notes that you would expect of Amarillo. But yeah, you do get a little touch of a kind of lemon limey character just behind the very front tip of the tongue too, where you've got all these kind of grassy notes. But yeah, I think the way this beer goes together is really nice, like a proper old school oily West Coast IPA. Yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. A really interesting beer from my perspective. So yeah, nice, just old school oily West Coast IPA, and I think there's a lot of sea hop in this one too. But yeah, we can round off this review with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So for me, this beer is quite mid-bodied. Yeah, nice kind of mid-bodied. Yes, right in the middle of the spectrum, this one, but maybe leaning a little bit more toward the top end of mid-bodied. Smooth carbonation, feels quite clean but also quite oily. In terms of IBUs, like I say, this is kind of built over time as I've drank more of the beer. I think this one is maybe about 50 or 60 IBUs. Could potentially, I think, yeah, 50 or 60 IBUs is probably about right. The malt base, as we said, has a little bit of graininess. It's got a little bit of bready smoothness, and you've also got that nice kind of oily character as well. And then you do have that big oily fruity note to it as well. So some nice tropical fruits, a little bit of a more oily, orangey, citrusy character, and then yeah, the way everything goes together otherwise is really quite nice. But yeah, proper old school, more oily leaning West Coast IPA for me. And this is a bit of a change of pace from the West Coast IPAs we've had in recent times. I've had quite a few kind of bready and biscuity leaning West Coast IPAs, but this one, to me, I always enjoyed the more oily and caramelly ones a bit more, and this one's kind of showing that side. So this beer is right up my alley actually. I'd love to see them do like a stronger 8% double West Coast IPA along these lines, so hopefully that's something we see from Beerbliotek going forward. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this review. This one was the We're Taking Over the World One Kiss at a Time, number 344 in the Beerbliotek inventory, West Coast IPA, 6.8% ABV. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Beerbliotek as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But definitely nice to get a proper old school West Coast IPA on the channel once again. So yeah, check out my social media, check out Beerbliotek's social media, and I will see you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.